What's up guys, Highway here, and to kick things off with our Overwatch 2 content on my channel, I've decided to give you the only tier list that you're going to need in Season 1. Now, I've repositioned characters numerous times over the past couple of weeks, especially with KIRIKO joining the cast in Ranked, but this is more or less where I think everyone has fallen to and will likely stay for the remainder of the season. Of course, the mid-season nerfs might change things up as well, but you know, we'll see when that comes. Alright, diving right into it, we're going to go role by role and in alphabetical order, going from DPS to tank, and then we're going to end with support. Remember, this is just a list of overall power and that pretty much any character has GM1 tricks who can carry their games. It's just a lot more work with a D tier than an S tier character. Starting with our C tiers for DPSs, we have Bastion, and for starters, Bastion is stuck against a hyper mobile meta with a huge hitbox and in a season where D.Va is a possible meta pick. This lands him sternly in the C tier. It's just a really hostile workplace for him, and there isn't much of anything for him to be able to do in order to get value. His ultimate, even with the infinite ammo bug, would usually only get 2 picks at best, and with that fix, it'll probably be going back to the half a kill average it probably had. That being said, he can still have some good value against slower tanks, and his damage is pretty decent. I just think he needs more in his kit. Next, we move on to SYMMETRA, our second C tier character, and Sym doesn't have much of a place anywhere, since she's not great with slow comps, and mobile comps tend to not really make much use out of her teleporter. She kinda gets outclassed at both ranges, and is certainly finding herself in a difficult situation to get value. It's not impossible though, and her ult is still pretty solid. The next hero on our C tier is Junkrat, and again, mobility is the name of the game, and with as much damage mitigation as there is, Junk tends to kinda just get ran over before he can really get his value from spam or one-shots. His tire is extremely good in the right situations, but sadly, Bap and KIRIKO are both pretty meta and each have invulnerability, so his tire kind of just ends up falling flat. Next up is Mei, and Mei just finds herself kind of being bad in almost all cases. A Mei who is really good can get a lot of value, but she ends up just kind of becoming a worse HANZO on the majority of the maps. On maps with close quarter engagements and choke points like Command Center on Lijiang, she can definitely be a higher tier pick, but really it's only on those maps specifically. Our next hero is Reaper, and I think Reaper had a lot of power to him early on in OW2, but as the meta is starting to settle more, he has gotten less and less powerful. Hypermobility, burst damage at range, and supports with an insane amount of sustain have really dropped Reaper down the ranks, and I think his lack of versatility keeps him stuck here at the C tier. Next on our C tier is Torb, and honestly Torb just isn't that great against snipers who can get a ton of value right now. He also isn't that great against SOJOURN, who is a fantastic pick, and he also isn't that great against D.Va, who is a fantastic pick. I could continue going down the list of heroes that he isn't great against right now, but really you get the idea, I think. His kit is okay, and he can work if the other team is running full flankers like Trace or Sombra, or an extremely slow composition that he can spam, but it's so rare to not fight a SOJOURN or any of the characters that really limit Torb, so he's kind of stuck here at the C tier. Our final DPS on the C tier is going to be CASSIDY, and CASSIDY has honestly been overrated for too long. As someone who is a long time, since Season 1, CASSIDY player and who has played with every edition of him, he really is just okay at best right now. If you land constant headshots, it can be good, or if he has a damage boost, but same goes for the A tier and S tier and really any other DPS. His abilities are so bland that they give him no standout value to really bring him up. Back in OW1 when they had tracers or flankers or something, I think maybe we needed CASSIDY for the stun, but now I haven't thought of that a single time. At least Reaper, I thought we needed one at one point. Next up, we have the B tier, and our first B tier hero is going to be Echo. Echo's honestly just barely above the C tier due to her assassination potential and her mobility with her flight, giving her the ability to get value with the fast-paced current meta. She's really not a fantastic pick, but she can work alright if you're good at her. Our next hero is Soldier76, and he lands in the B tier thanks to his great rotating mobility. His main struggle is securing picks with the low amount of burst damage he has. This really significantly limits him, but his overall damage output is at least decent enough to allow him to provide value otherwise. His ultimate is also fairly strong in Overwatch 2 and can catch a lot of people off guard. Next up, my B tier is going to be PHARAH, and PHARAH's power comes from the fact that she can counter a lot of different heroes due to her range and verticality, making her difficult to fight for many non-hit scan heroes. Her damage is pretty massive and her ultimate is decent for securing picks, and it also charges extremely quickly. This all adds up to land her at my B tier. Our final B tier hero is HANZO, and HANZO is a mid-range monster, but is ultimately extremely susceptible to dives at this range. If he had more long-range consistency, he'd easily be in my A tier, but due to said lack of consistency forcing him closer, it makes it significantly easier to deal with a HANZO. He simply does not have the mobility to avoid the dives, but his pick potential and his carry potential is still huge. We are now moving on to the A tier, and first in our A tier is going to be Ashe. Ashe is certainly map dependent. She needs good range and high grounds to effectively position, but her power on these maps is pretty undeniable. Bob remains one of the best DPS ultimates in the game, and she can build him pretty fast fast against most teams. A drop from what she once was, but she is still strong all the same. Next on the A tier is going to be WIDOWMAKER. There are still some maps that Widow just absolutely shuts down on her own. She requires good aim, but is a monster on open angles all the same, and I suspect once Rialto and Havana are back, she'll be even stronger. Her dive ability makes it difficult to get situated at times, and with how strong SOMBRA is, she has to be careful on how split she plays, but her pick potential is still undeniably powerful. Next on my A tier, I have Tracer, and Tracer is actually starting to become more and more meta as we continue the push for dive-based team comps, and truthfully, she has the potential to be an S tier in the right hands. Her mobility and independence keep her a solid pick against most team comps and allow for her to follow up on dives very effectively. Moving on to our S tier for DPSs, we first have SOMBRA. SOMBRA is a ridiculously powerful DPS right now due to her high damage output, her truly powerful ultimate, and her hack being so difficult to counter yet so impactful and repeatable. She is truly a menace right now, and I think anyone who has played against a SOMBRA would tell you the same. Nerf soon, hopefully S tier. Our next DPS on the S tier is of course going to be GENJI. GENJI is really damn good. His mobility lets him work well in dive comps or as a solo player. His dash getting resets on eliminations allows for a get in, get out playstyle, or a super aggressive snowbally one. His ultimate is obviously fantastic, and the removal of most CC has caused him to be a much more deadly close range force. GENJI mains rejoice, he is certainly in the S tier right now. Our final DPS to cover is going to be SOJOURN, who lands solidly at the S tier. She has some of the game's best mobility, does a ridiculous amount of damage, and has immense pick potential. She really is utterly fantastic, and be sure to keep your eyes peeled for the unranked GM I'll be posting on her as soon as I finish the challenge. All in all, she is S tier and probably needs some serious nerfs. Moving on to our next role, we have of course the tanks, and starting at the D tier, which I call the Doomfist tier, we have a tank who's really just so bad right now he's in a league of his own. When I started Overwatch 2, it seemed like good Doomfist could make him work, but with Sombra becoming meta and the game shifting to being almost entirely mobility over the past week or so, we really are starting to see just how many flaws Doom has. Because of this, he lands square at the D tier all by himself. His ult is bad, his kit is bad, he isn't strong enough to survive on his own, he has low damage and pick potential, he's just poor performing at everything. I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't get a bit of guilty pleasure out of seeing it through all the pain of fighting bug-ridden Doomfist in Overwatch 1. That being said, please buff Doom, enough is enough. Moving on to our C tier, we have ROADHOG, and ROADHOG serves to do little else than charge up the enemy SOJOURN's railgun and get his team one shot. Really, the only time ROADHOG works is if the enemy tank player is significantly worse than the ROADHOG player is. Zarya counters Hog, D.Va counters Hog, even Orisa can counter Hog, and all of them are better tanks. Furthermore, you have to deal with other meta heroes that are good Hog counters. He just doesn't have enough answers for all the heroes that really do a ton of damage and remove his kit entirely. Next on the C tier is going to be Wrecking Ball. I may get some hate for this, but I honestly think Ball is in the same spot as ROADHOG. He really only thrives with the other team is significantly worse. If they run a Sombra, which is super meta, Ball is a very vulnerable tank to being rolled due to his low tankiness and massive hitbox. Plus, with Sombra's hacking health packs, it's harder for Ball to play solo and independently in the enemy backline. There are also various other characters that do what he does much better, and that lands him at the C tier. Maybe he can be B tier in the right hands, but I'd rather just have a different tank anyway. Our final C-lister is going to be Junker Queen, and Junker Queen is really just another version of ROADHOG right now. Her shot was her main power source, and they nerfed it pretty into the ground, which makes it difficult for her to open space up for her team. She has no shields or damage mitigation, her damage output is all close range, which is a problem since her mobility is low. Her ultimate is pretty good, however, and can definitely win fights, but she overall just falls short of the versatility that some of the higher tier tanks have. Moving on into our B tier, we have REINHART, and Rein is a bit of a map dependent tank, but he really thrives and pops off on some of them. He could be annoying to deal with if your team doesn't actively focus him, which means he does make a decent amount of space for the rest of his own backline. A good Rein can create opportunities, but his lack of vertical mobility means that he struggles to really contest high grounds, which is the main thing that prevents him from being up on the higher tiers. He also has some clear counters that are pretty strong in the current meta, which leaves him at my B tier. Our next B tier tank is going to be Orisa, who can honestly be surprisingly powerful in the right player's hands. Her main struggle is that the characters that are really good right now happen to be the main characters that completely ruin Orisa's play. Heroes with high mobility that can fly around above her, and heroes like Zarya who can just keep pressuring her with tons of damage, and save teammates that get trapped in some of Orisa's abilities. Her kit is pretty strong, but the issues of counters remain ever present, leaving her at the B tier for me. We have one tank in our A tier, and that would be Sigma. Sig is really good at setting strong defensive positions. I consider him to be pretty underrated, in fact. His ultimate is very strong and can serve to be a solid counter to multiple different meta ultimates such as Nano, Kitsune, Blade, etc. And his damage mitigation is some of the best in the game, between him having one of the only shields left, as well as his kinetic grasp, which can also eat enemies' ultimates when timed well. His damage is nothing to scoff at either, and this allows him to hold some strong positions and be a constant pressure no matter what. He is an A tier pick for me. Moving on to our S tier, we have one hero which should shock nobody, Zarya. Zarya has been dominating the ladder since she is able to do tons of damage with an unreal amount of self-sustain from her bubbles and shield health, and her Graviton Surge is a pretty consistent fight winner. Her bubbles also allow for her to do some really crazy setups with her team, making someone like a blading GENJI simply unkillable, and thus making Zar an incredible enabler. She is very strong right now and has a stern place in the S tier. Our next hero in the S tier is going to be D.Va, and D.Va is honestly insane right now. Her Matrix feels like it lasts forever with the buff, her mobility is obviously just as strong as ever, and her high burst damage makes her an incredibly effective assassin. The ability to eat enemy ultimates and mitigate massive amounts of damage comes very much in handy for D.Va, enabling her team and being a constant pressure for keeping everybody alive. She truly is as versatile as she always has been and now has more power to boot. This lands her solidly at my S tier. Our final S tier tank is going to come as a shocker to some, but I think you'll see coming in the near future why he's just so good. Winston. Winston's bubble is a really powerful tool for enabling pushes, having a good amount of health but being far larger than something like Sigma's shield. Monkey's burst damage with his right click land melee combo makes him a powerful diver and sets his team up for very easy kills, especially with heroes like Sombra and Genji being so meta. His ability to set these pushes up makes him very strong, and his ult is pretty powerful in Overwatch 2 since there is one less hero to deal damage, and pulling even one or two people out of a fight is a significantly larger impact than it once was. Monkeys rejoice, your time is coming soon. Just watch out for D.Va right now. S tier. Our final role is going to be support, and starting off in the C tier, we have Brigitte. Brig is honestly not that powerful right now. She's easy and can get a lot of value, especially at lower ranks, but she simply does not pack the same punch that the other meta supports do. She is pretty weak against the hypermobile meta that is taking shape, and thus makes it difficult for her to get that much value. I still think she's better than Doomfist though, which means I put her here at the C tier. Moving into the B tier for support, we have Mercy, and Mercy just doesn't have enough. She can't really solo carry, she can make a few good plays here and there, maybe by pistoling off a weak enemy and rezzing, but overall her kit is just not stacked enough to compare with the other supports in the roster. She also comes at a great cost of not having high heal output, which prohibits the team from running certain other powerful supports in the higher tier without just losing outright. She stays here at the B tier, however, due to the simple fact that a pocketed DPS does actually have the capacity to carry an entire game if the character and the player is right. Our next B tier pick is going to be ZENYATTA. Zen is just too slow to survive in the meta right now. He has a big, easy hitbox, he moves slow, and he can't really get enough time to effectively put out damage against the likes of Monkey Sombra or Zarya Genji or D.Va Tracer, whatever dive you run against really. His kit is still pretty good, but if the other team just runs something more fast-paced, Zen quickly becomes nearly unplayable and thus falls here at the B tier, where he is pretty good until he suddenly isn't. Moving on into the A tier, we first have Moira, and Moira has some solid heal and damage output and can sustain against dives due to her Fade ability being so strong. This independence allows her to potentially get more value over a long fight than another support with less mobility and sustain might, which makes her a solid pick against dive teams. Her ultimate is a solid push starter, and her damage is okay enough for peeling flankers off of her if they are alone. She doesn't have much fight winning utility however, and mainly carries by staying alive and getting a steady stream of good value. Our next A tier hero is going to be Ana, and Ana is too slow to sustain in the high mobility meta, but on some maps with good sightlines, especially when she is defending, she can still be made to work. Her kit is very strong, with Sleep Dart potentially securing steady picks and stopping ultimates, and with Nade securing steady fight wins, but she overall does not have enough sustain to survive if she has to come closer. Her nano is also solid, which puts her here at the A tier, encroaching on the S, but not quite. Moving on into the S tier, we first have KIRIKO. KIRIKO is the newest healer, but has a totally stacked ability set. Her ultimate is very strong and allows for her team to win fights in a super impressive manner. Her damage output is the best on the support line, securing a steady flow of picks if the KIRIKO is good. Her heals being auto-aimed really help with healing these super mobile DPSs that teams are likely to run, and her teleport allows for her to get in or out as needed. On top of all of that, she has an invulnerability that also cleanses Nade and a variety of some of the best stuns in the game, even Earthshatter. She is absolutely at the S tier. Our next S tier hero is going to be, sadly, Lucio. I really dislike Lucio if I'm being honest. I think that he dictates far too many metas due to the sheer power of speed boost. That being said, I can't deny his power since the speed amp makes engages that much quicker in this mobile meta, and his own mobility is insanely fast. This allows for him to sustain himself against the dives very effectively, and he also has a great peeling tool in his boop that knocks enemies away from teammates and can absolutely ruin dives or save teammates. Sound Barrier is also a fantastic ult that counters many of the best ults in the game right now, landing him as a pretty much must pick at a high level. Our final S tier hero is going to be Baptiste. Baptiste does a good amount of damage, has a ton of AoE burst healing, and his self-sustain is pretty great. His immortality field to this day remains as one of the best abilities in all of Overwatch, capable of saving an entire team from damage that would otherwise kill them multiple times over. The fact that enemies have to stop to shoot at it also gives Bap much needed seconds to heal his team back to full when the enemy fire is diverted. This makes him incredibly powerful as a whole. His mobility is decent, with his jump giving him some much appreciated verticality to get away from divers, and all in all he lands at the S tier for me. And with Bap out of the way, we have all of my picks for the various tiers in Overwatch 2. Be sure to like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this list, and I will see you all soon. Take care and peace.